Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. What can we learn from hostage negotiations and dealing with other high pressure crisis situations? That's the question we're going to discuss today with my guest, Andy Brown, who's a really seasoned professional in this area, having worked for many years in the police and subsequently dealt with such situations. Some really fascinating stories and experiences that Andy is going to share, but also some great learnings that we can take into our day-to-day world of managing safety and risk, where, let's be honest, we're not dealing with such high pressure situations all that frequently, fingers crossed. But things we can learn in terms of how we navigate those situations, how we build rapport, how we listen actively, how we influence, and how we therefore get things done. I'm sure you'll enjoy this. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope you will too. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Andy.
You're welcome, Chris. Absolutely delighted to help you out with this podcast.
No worries. It's a pleasure to have you on. So you've been involved in some really interesting stuff over the years and some particularly challenging missions. I thought we'd start by going back to the kind of Afghanistan experience. Could you kind of take us inside of that, how what it was like to be evacuating staff from Afghanistan, and then I suppose what impact did that have on you, kind of emotionally and professionally?
Uh, well, very good question. It's probably one of the most stressful things I've ever had to deal with.
Mm.
It becomes particularly more stressful when you know the individuals involved. So part of the challenge with Afghanistan was, like with many countries that are in conflict, that there's a real importance in understanding how the country functions, and particularly with the Taliban in Afghanistan, how the insurgency was moving. So prior to August 2021, read a lot of intelligence reports, engaged in a lot of different online sessions to try and understand the pace and speed at which it was moving. It certainly moved a lot quicker than anybody anticipated, which started to catch many people out. And for us, we were in a very fortunate position because of where we are in the world, and because of our relationship with the Holy See, that we were able to influence and work very closely with the military to get some of our key staff out.
Mm.
Part of the challenge with these things, and we've seen this with Afghanistan, with Ukraine, with Syria in the past, all these different countries, when you move people out, they've got to have somewhere to go.
Yeah.
So in past times, that's been actually relatively straightforward, where countries have been willing to take these people in, to integrate them into communities, to look after them. But what we found in Afghanistan was that immediate need to get people out, and the knowledge that had we not got them out, then there was a very high likelihood that they would have lost their lives,
Mm.
and they would have been killed by the Taliban.
Yeah.
So that adds a huge amount of pressure. And as a father like you are, it's very important to recognise that it's not just the individual that you are seeking to take out; it's a family unit,
Mm.
right? Which even adds even more pressure. Now, when I was going through it, when we were working through all the key issues, part of the biggest challenge was navigating within Kabul, because the Taliban were everywhere. There was checkpoints everywhere. It was like a constantly moving Jumanji board, where if you took the wrong move, you get caught out. So it was understanding that dynamic, and some of the intelligence feeds that came in that were really important that helped us to do that.
Hmm.
And then it was moving, uh, getting that engagement with the military at Kabul airport, that suddenly opened that window to say, right, we now know that we can get people inside, which was fantastic. And then because of my background in policing and some of the things that I've experienced, uh, I knew exactly how that operation works in terms of that extraction of staff inside the airport.
Yeah.
What I also saw at the same time was a lot of private military contractors doing what some of them do to say to other NGOs, look, we can get your people to the airport and it's going to cost you $20,000 to
Mm.
get a minibus to the airport. And I was saying to these other NGOs, wait a minute, you need to ask the question, can they get your staff inside the airport? If it's just a minibus to take you to the airport, then you can go to the street corner and you can get a cab that'll take you to the airport for a couple of dollars.
Yeah.
So it was understanding that different dynamic, and unfortunately, there are some people that maximize the desperation to make money,
Yeah.
which is quite a sad thing, but it's quite consistent through conflict.
Mm.
And when we got our first tranche of people inside the airport, I knew a lot of them. I knew the kids, I knew the families. I went through and breathed a sigh of relief to my wife, and it was in the middle of the night that the whole thing happened, UK time.
Mm.
And she said, "Are you okay?" And I went, "No, I'm not." And I burst out crying.
Mm.
Now, for 30 years in the police, I never cried once. And in policing, you deal with a whole lot of different things, and you see the good and bad in life.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, okay, that wasn't something that I expected. And then we got the feedback saying that, okay, you've had 30 people inside the airport. They're on a military flight. They're out of the country, which was great. And I thought, okay, fantastic. But I've got like 200 core staff I need to get out. So
Yeah.
30 for me wasn't enough. So I
Mm.
pushed back to Rome to say, look, we need to get more people out. And in the intervening period, and you'll understand this as a dad, my daughter started primary one on the day after I did that.
Mm.
So I turned up at school, her first day in primary one. She was in a uniform looking really smart. Uh, and we were in the queue with other parents. And one of the ladies said to my wife, "Oh, what do you do?" And my wife at that time worked for the National Trust for Scotland. So
Okay.
looking after, a lot of Scotland's heritage and
Mm.
the likes of Glencoe in terms of the mountains. So she said, this is what I do and I look after the mountains in Glencoe. And then the lady says, "Oh, what does he do?" Referring to me. And my wife quipped back. She says, "Oh, he just moves them, as in moves the mountains."
Yeah.
So I did that. Daughter started school, which is great. Next day or later that night, I get a phone call back from Rome to say, right, okay, we've been given the green light to take more people in uh, at Abbey Gate at Kabul airport. Now, at that time, there was a live and significant threat from ISIS-K of a potential attack because of the crowds. And the military, I take my hat off to them, were absolutely fabulous. I had all our staff prepared and saying, "This is what's going to happen. This is how these things happen." In terms of a grab squad to grab them inside the gate. And I said it's quite a violent process, but you just need to go with it because they're going to grab you and pull you in.
Yeah.
And the military did that. We got 65 people in at Abbey Gate before the suicide bombing. And the suicide bombing killed a number of the military that had been working with us.
Mm.
So again, I go back through to the bedroom after getting these people inside the safety of the airport, knowing they're going on flights out of the country, and went back through and said to my wife, right. And she goes, "You okay?" I went, "No." Burst out crying again. So I was thinking, oof, that's really, really difficult. And then we knew that that was the end of our mission to get as many of our staff out as possible. We didn't
Mm.
get all out. And part of the challenge was of the staff we didn't get out, there was one mother who was heavily pregnant, who basically just physically couldn't, and she had to go and give birth to her daughter. Now, her daughter, who's alive and well and now in Canada, was a beacon of hope for us all, uh, because that gave us that very acute awareness that there is life and death in
Yeah.
these things, and that vision of seeing that photograph of that young baby girl being born was absolutely fabulous because it
Mm.
gave us that continued hope. And then it was for the remaining 10 families, as I basically worked over a period of 2 years, quietly moved them into Pakistan, looked after them in Pakistan until such times you could get them out to a third country.
Mm.
And that takes a lot of work because you need to guide them through that process. And it feels like you're almost a father to them,
Mm.
to walking them through living in a different country, dealing with the different challenges, and navigating through the complexity of getting people into another country safely, but also in the knowledge that they've got to comply with the immigration requirements within that country so that they can then, integrate and to enjoy a life that is free from persecution.
Mm.
And then after the whole thing had finished, uh, a good friend offered up her cottage in North Yorkshire, in the Yorkshire Dales,
Mm.
and we basically jumped in the car as a family and drove down there. It's really good because there's hardly any mobile reception,
Yeah.
so I was able to switch off from the digital side of it and spent a lot of time just wandering the hills and being able to decompress after dealing with something that was really really stressful.
Mm.
So that's how I deal with it. And one of the questions that was asked by one of my colleagues in Rome was, "How do you deal with the pressure, Andy?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay." I says, "That's very simple." I said, "Three things." I said, "Firstly," I says, "I take my dog for a walk up the hills every single day, just me and the dog, and that is probably my quiet time in terms of, uh, you know, you get the good physical exercise, but it's also quiet time inside your head, allows you to think through things at a different pace."
Yeah.
I said, "Secondly, my wife is Greek Cypriot, so she's pretty tough." I says, "In fact, I'm convinced she's from Sparta." Uh, so I need that as a man. I need that strong guidance, and it's strong, loving guidance and support, which was absolutely instrumental in being able to work through that. And then thirdly, I said to my colleague, I said, "The Minions, the cartoon, the Minions," and she said to me, "The Minions?" I said, "Yes." I said, "At the height of this, when it was chaos was raining down in Afghanistan, we were busy trying to get staff out. My young daughter wanted to watch The Minions. She's 4 years old, about to be five." And I said, "Okay." And I sat down and watched The Minions. She had not a clue what I was doing
Mm.
because of her age, but that allowed that very precious uh, dad and daughter time. And that I suppose helped to provide a degree of balance into what I was actually doing.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's been my approach to these things.
Yeah.
I still consistently do that, and I find that really helps. And I suppose as a police officer, what police officers are good at doing uh, is we're good at uh, going through a case, reviewing it to say, well, what do we do well in relation to responding to that crisis, and what do we not do well?
Mm.
So looking at the warts and all to say how can we learn from that? How can we improve? So it's that continual
Yeah.
improvement cycle
Mhm. Mm.
that's very, very helpful.
Yeah. I guess in the police as well, you're less emotionally attached to the people, right? Because you knew these
Yeah,
people and you work with them, and so you can. It's probably a little bit easier to, although you may be dealing with horrendous things, obviously.
yeah.
It's probably a bit easier to sort of detach yourself, is it?
Eh, Well, to an extent, I mean, I did most of my operational policing up in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. So you live and work in the community.
Yeah.
So you tend to know a lot of the community, and you know, part of that can be delivering a death message to a family that
Mhm.
if a child has died in a road accident, for example,
Yeah.
uh, and you learn to deal with that because that's your work. Uh,
Yeah.
I think when I did policing, there wasn't the level of support that is now being put in place for police officers in terms of dealing with some of these traumatic events that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
Uh, and that was just part of our role within the community. It was very much a vocation uh, within the community to support that community and to help guide them through difficult times.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Makes sense. So you mentioned, Andy, the working with the Holy See. When we spoke before, you had a really good analogy of how you, because you've been working with the Jesuit community for a long time. You had a really good analogy of um, how you have to sort of manage them in terms of
Yeah,
uh, looking after their security, that I thought was really great in terms of a safety person who would be trying to manage the risks within a business as well. Do you want
yeah.
to talk a bit about that?
So I part of the challenge for me personally, I did 30 years of policing where, as I'm sure you understand, policing is very task driven. So you're given a task and you get on with it. Uh, and working with a faith-based organization is very, very different because their foundation is not in task-driven work.
No.
They look at it very differently. And very at a very early stage, when I was working with the Jesuits, uh, I get consistently told in some really difficult countries across the world where there was active conflicts, I would get pushback from some country directors saying, "Look, Andy, you know, thanks for your advice, but God will protect us." And I said, "Yes, absolutely." I said, "I don't disagree with that whatsoever." And then I sort of paused and said, "But why do you think God sent a Scotsman to look after you?" And you get that little bit of laugh. And I've spent a long time reading Ignatian scripture, understanding it, because as a negotiator, your primary role is to try and understand how someone thinks, right? You can't anticipate everything they're going to do, but you can seek to understand how they think. Now, by understanding and reading the scripture, uh, and anybody from a faith-based background will tell you that people can interpret scripture in different ways.
Yeah, of course.
So it's very difficult when you're not immersed in that faith to actually understand it. So for me, it was very much a learning journey to work with them to understand how they would move. And one of the very early on cases that I dealt with is there is, and you see this in other different faiths, is they don't like to make decisions quickly. So they like to go away and discern, they like to pray and to very much have a considered decision,
Mm.
which might be completely different from what you and I would think in terms of a logical sense. And my first encounter with that was when I was helping them respond to the kidnap of their country director in Afghanistan. And uh, we, I said to them, I said, as a crisis management team, we need to think about and discuss ransom.
Mm.
If we get a ransom demand, are you going to pay it? How much money are you going to pay? If we're not going to pay it, and then how do we navigate through that? And I was very quickly told by one of the crisis management team who was a criminal lawyer from the
Mm.
States and also a Jesuit. He said, "Andy, we're not discussing that." And I very sort of calmly sort of paused and then said, "It's okay." I said, "That's fine." I said, "But in a kidnap for ransom, we need to discuss it." And I said, there is a choice here for a crisis management team. We either discuss that with me in a rational manner and we think through it, think through different scenarios, and define what our position is as an organisation, or you're going to have to discuss it with the Taliban, who we believe has taken this individual.
Mm.
And I said that is a completely different scenario in terms of legality, but also in terms of ethics, and also in terms of if you pay an organisation money in terms of ransom, does that impact on your future prospects of continuing the mission in that country?
Mm.
So very quickly we suddenly said, okay, well we need to discuss this, and we went through that conversation. So so guiding people that have a very different mindset can be difficult.
Mm.
So I think it's really important as any advisor in terms of safety and security takes the time to get to know the organization they're working with. And a lot of that stuff you can do online by good research. But
Yeah.
it's also really important to actively engage, to actively listen, to try and empathize, to
Hmm.
try and see it from their perspective. I mean, I remember working with an oil and gas company in Aberdeen. I went to their offices in Aberdeen, and I got the health and safety briefing in the office in Aberdeen. I said,
Yeah.
if you're going up the stairs, Andy, you need to go up the stairs and hold on to the handrail as you're going upstairs. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm in my 40s, I can go upstairs without hanging onto the handrail. And they said, no, you need to do it. And I'm thinking, wow, okay. So a very, very strict adherence to health and safety, but I understood where that come from. That came from. That came from working on a rig,
Hmm.
where it is actually vitally important you hang onto the handrail. So for me, it's about understanding the organisation you're working with, uh, and taking the time and the patience to get to understand how they work, how they function. It is very easy to take a book of guidance and say, this is what you need to do.
Mm.
And I can tell you right now that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I know, I've got examples where we, you might remember some time back, I think it was 2020, there was the earthquake in DRC in Goma,
Yeah.
and the volcano erupted. Now, I saw it in the 10 o'clock news and I thought, oof, right, that's a big, that's a big, volcanic explosion. And I knew that we had an office in Goma, so I picked up the phone, spoke to the country director who's a Jesuit, and I said, right, how close is this to our office? And he went to the window and took a video on WhatsApp and sent it to me of this wall of lava, which is about 12 feet deep, coming down the street.
Right.
And he said to me, he
So
said,
so it's
but
pretty close then.
it was pretty, yeah, pretty close. And he says, but it's okay, Andy. He says, I'm going to sleep in the middle of the office floor. And I says to him, I says, but he says, I'll be fine. I says, no, you won't. I says, what holds up the roof? The walls. And he goes, all right. I says, we're going to move. So we moved into a team, I think it was around about 6 people, across Lake Kivu, to the other side, so we could set up, so we could continue the mission. We did that, and the following day, the UN, announced the evacuation of the main populace out of Goma, and we were in a position because we'd already set up, we were all ready to receive and to support the people fleeing. And then, to my surprise, I got an email from another NGO security advisor saying, Andy, I understand you evacuated your team across Lake Kivu. There are issues with methane bubbles coming up from the bed of the lake. Can you send me your risk assessment for doing that? I went, oh. I said, no, I can't. I said, it was a dynamic risk assessment we took at the time. The objective was to get the staff to safety. I said, the boatsman was elderly. He knew the lake like the back of his hand, and got our team safely across the lake so we could set up and receive people fleeing the volcanic eruption.
Mm.
And that's something that I learned quite early on in my policing days, that you're not going to have a risk assessment that's written for absolutely everything.
No.
That's almost impossible. But in a dynamic situation, you certainly, I was told that you write notes and you rationalize your decisions to say, this is why I've made this decision at this time.
Yeah.
Which is, and I found that stayed with me throughout my career, and I find that very, very helpful
Mm.
because sometimes I think we can get ourselves hamstrung by processes and procedures, and we
Yeah.
know that they don't always work.
Mm. Yeah. Very, very true. Very true. Um, One of the other things we briefly chatted about was kind of working in different cultures. You mentioned, I think, Nigeria in terms of different rules of engagement. So how do you kind of navigate that from a practical and I suppose an ethical perspective to achieve the objectives that you want to achieve?
Well, a lot of that goes back to my early policing career. Uh, I went off the training at the police college, and as soon as I finished that and started uh, police work, you're very quickly told by the old cops, "Oh, you've been at college. That's fine. You've got a bit of knowledge. Now, forget this. This is the real job. This is how you do it." So it's learning from that that wisdom of others that have experienced it before. And when I've worked in small communities, communities already know a lot about you and already know why you're there.
Mm.
So my experience in the humanitarian sphere has been in different cultures. For me, it's always really important that you recognize and respect that culture.
Yeah.
You are you are a guest in their land, okay? So for me, I mean, probably a really good example was when we went to Nigeria to do a needs assessment. We met with a group of people that had been displaced by Boko Haram, and they were all farmers. So I've had the pleasure of working on crofts in the Scottish Highlands when I was younger, and knowing how difficult that is during the winter time when the weather is really harsh, and the impact that has on the animals and how you look after them. So when we met this group, my team leader had a list of questions he wanted to ask as part of his needs assessment, and I said to him, I says, just put that back in your folder just now and just watch and listen. So because I was older and because I'm tall and I've got grey hair, the elders wanted to speak to me.
Mhm.
So I engaged with the elders, we introduced ourselves, uh, and I said to Mrs. Understand you're farmers. I said it must be very difficult to be displaced from your lands that you've worked over generations. Uh, so I said I can't begin to imagine how difficult that is, but I know from my own experience of farming that that is it's very hard, and you put blood, sweat, and toil into that land so it can produce food for your families.
Mm.
And I listened, and then I got to the point, where it's probably about half an hour. Got to the point and said, thank you for the introductions. It's I'm now going to hand over to the team leader who will tell you why we've come. And the elders just sort of smiled and looked at me and handed over a sheet of A4 because he knew that we'd come to meet them to set up a school.
Mhm.
So on the sheet of A4, on one side was all the names of the children in the community. They're in different levels of education, all the primary years and
Mhm.
all the secondary years. And then on the back of the piece of paper was a list of all the community teachers, all their qualifications, and all their subject areas that they
Mhm.
taught. So, and I just sort of smiled because from my own experience, I knew that that's what would happen. And the team leader looked at me and says, Andy, he says, you've managed to get all the information we need and you haven't asked a single question. And I says, I said, that is the beauty of active listening and trying to empathize with them. So that was really good in that perspective. And then when we went to set up another school in another region of Nigeria, we recognized through our research that the village in which we wanted to set up was divided in terms of faith. So it was 50% Muslim and 50% Christian.
Right.
So we went to speak to the bishop, had a meeting, had an audience with the bishop. He was very keen and gave us his blessing to set up that school. And then we arranged an appointment with the emir in the
Mhm.
village, and we went to meet with him. And we had a similar meeting, and he was very enthusiastic because he was a former teacher, and he very much was wanting to be involved in it. And we got his blessing. And to this day, that is probably one of our most successful projects in the country because we are there with the consent and the support of the community,
Yeah.
because they see the benefit to the children. Because basically, by educating the children and keeping them in school, you, to a large extent, prevent them from going into what you see in this country is, gangs,
Yeah.
and in respect of Nigeria, it's into groups like Boko Haram.
Mhm.
So for me, the culture is really important. It's understanding how we communicate. And I know from a Western perspective, we can be very direct, very simple in our communication, very to the point.
Yeah.
Uh, but in an Eastern culture, that just doesn't land well. So I need to adjust how I communicate in different countries.
Mhm.
So with my Afghan colleagues, uh, I would always begin a sentence with, my greetings to you and your family and talk about family because that's really, really important. And then eventually get to the point, but also to recognize that anything that you say, you need to be carefully crafted because in that type of Eastern culture, uh, suggestibility and an inference in a sentence to their mind can actually mean a guarantee.
Right.
So that's quite a fine line to understand and to negotiate. So understanding the culture is really important. And I think for me, and it's something that I've learned over the years, in different cultures, you tend to have the older population in that culture who have a deep understanding not only of the culture but of that cultural wisdom and that sometimes that tribal wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that we pay cognizance to that because that very much influences your acceptance within that community. And that's really important.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Great advice there. When we think about a negotiation, let's say hostage negotiation,
Mhm.
what would you say are maybe the top couple of myths about that sort of situation that people would think is true, but actually it's not the case. Is there anything that springs to mind?
I think, I mean, it is complex. So, I mean, I suppose my early engagement as in that specialism was it's like playing mental chess with someone.
Right.
Uh, physically, it's not massively demanding, but mentally it is. And it's very much a team approach. So there is no way that I could gather all that information and process it and be able to respond. So it's a team approach.
Mm.
And for me, there are a couple of golden rules. Is that negotiators negotiate and commanders command. If you have a negotiator making the decisions, then that never ends well.
Right.
So the purpose of commanders making that command decision and making, an informed decision is that they have access to a lot of the intelligence. Uh, they can make decisions based to the benefit of the organization and the individuals, including, the hostage takers,
Yeah.
which is compliant with human rights.
Hmm.
So they're allowed to do that, and they're allowed to do that in probably a slower time. And the negotiator's job is to engage, to build dialogue, to build rapport, to, to influence, to put in suggestibility, and to have that good dialogue with a hostage taker. When the hostage taker comes back and say, I demand all these things, you can say, well, I need to pass this back to the bosses. And the purpose of doing that is you slow it down.
Yeah.
And as you slow it down, you start to see human behavior. So all of us at some point need to go to the toilet. All
Yeah.
of us need to be fed, to have water. So you start to see some of the psychology of these human behaviors. And that is very important to understand in terms tactically, to understand that rhythm.
Mm.
Eh, and it's when you start to understand the rhythm and the dialogue, it's how you can then start to very gently persuade someone to change their behavior. And one of the most dangerous times in that process is when you are about to see the change in behavior, because there can be a moment where you say, I'm going to take my foot off the gas because I know they're going to change their behavior.
Mm.
You need to see that behavior change. So I say to people, it's like Usain Bolt running 100 meters. He just doesn't run to 100-meter line and stop. He runs away beyond it. So for me, it's about making sure you see that behavioural change happen. It's very difficult in terms of negotiating with difficult individuals with different personality types.
Mm.
Narcissists are some of the most difficult individuals you have to negotiate with. But it's using the skills from psychology. I suppose to a large extent, we're nicknamed street psychologists because we understand the street and all the dynamics that are involved in understanding that dynamic within society. But we also have a little bit of understanding in terms of psychology, which is actually really important when you start to identify characteristics and how you apply these different tactics.
Yeah.
And as you know, being a dad, uh, uh, different generations have different tactics.
Yeah.
So you and I growing up, we respected our elders, uh, because they had experienced a different generation. My mum and dad were born, during the Second World War. So a very different dynamic for them growing up, different dynamic for me growing up. But, I've got an elder son who's in his early 30s now, and I can speak to him quicker by text
Mm.
than actually the phone because he won't answer his phone. Apparently it's never in his hand, but he'll answer a text within a couple of seconds. So it's a different dynamics in terms of different expectations across generations. So there are lots of different tactics that negotiators can use, and it's the application of these tactics. But there is a other principle is that there are no precise rules
Yeah.
because you're dealing with human beings. We are
Hmm.
all unique.
Yeah.
So from the moment we wake up, we are influenced by hundreds of things. You talk about people that are mindful, that live in the moment, and that's fantastic. But guaranteed, when they're having a shave in the morning or having a shower, they might think, well, what will I have for my breakfast this morning?
Yeah.
Can't wait to taste my coffee. So already they're jumping ahead. So it's taking the time to actively listen. And for me, one of the things that I say to people is that God gave us two ears and one mouth, and we need to use them in that proportion.
Mm.
Unfortunately, many of us don't.
Yeah.
Many of us think we're good listeners and we're actually not. So
Mm.
it's learning to listen, learning to use your voice as a tool,
Yeah.
which is really, really important.
Yeah. And if you're training somebody then to negotiate,
Yeah.
maybe not in that sort of high pressure setting, but in a different sort of situation, how do you get that training to sort of stick? How do we make sure that
Yeah. So
they follow through what they've been taught?
so so all of us have the skills already, right? And in terms of a traditional bell curve, you're going to have a very small minority of people who are natural negotiators who tend to be introverted. You have the vast majority that can learn skills and apply them, and then you'll have a small minority who just can't negotiate. Type of individuals that would go into an empty room and have a fight with themselves. So how do you get them to apply these skills? So you teach the skills, but really important that you exercise these skills.
Right.
So role play is a massive thing in teaching people. One of the things the techniques that I use is I designed an exercise called an ego buster, because ego is probably the biggest barrier to how we negotiate. And in the ego buster is I have an individual who's been given a script, and a bit of story, and get them to sit in a chair and to face the wall. So by facing the wall, I've deprived the participants of a large extent the body language of the individual that's role
Yeah.
playing. So they've got to actively engage. They can't touch the individual. They can't go in front of the individual. Can't be in the line of sight. So they've got to engage. And what you tend to see, and it's been quite funny over the years, is the extroverts who are quite keen to, oh yeah, this is easy. And you say to them, right, you've only got to engage for 1 minute. And they jump up, and the extroverts want to engage for 1 minute, and you have somebody timing it, but the first three people don't get any response from the role player. So an extrovert really struggles with lack of response,
Yeah.
and you tend to maybe hit around about the 30 seconds mark and then suddenly dry up.
Right.
Don't know what to say. And then as it starts to unfold, you tend to find that those who are maybe a little bit more introverted and attuned to the skills of active listening start to understand what's happened to that individual and start to take the pieces of the jigsaw and put it together. So that's really important. And
Mm.
also what's really important is getting to people to refine how they use their voice.
Right.
Now, I've done this probably in an unconventional way. I was coaching a guy who was a very high performing salesperson, and as in getting to know him, he said to me, he says, "Look, Andy, I come home and I sit in the car for 30 minutes just to decompress before I go into the house." I'm going, "Oh, wow." He said, "At the weekend, I'll run maybe about 35 miles." I'm going, "My goodness, okay, right, okay." And I said, "Okay." I said, "First exercise, I want you to read The Gruffalo and you'll understand the story."
Yeah.
So he read it cover to cover in a minute. Right, there was no change in his voice. It was just bang, 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 bang through all the
Yeah.
words. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Is that how you read the story to your daughter?" "Yes." "Okay, right. So I want you to read it again, but I want you to take 5 minutes to read it." And I said, "Use your voice to describe the Gruffalo and to describe the interactions that the Gruffalo has."
Mhm.
So he did that. I said, "You've got to paint the picture in your daughter's head of this wonderful story of
Yeah.
this beast." So the 5 minutes took, and he says, "Oh," he says, "Right." He says, "I'm now starting to get this." And I said, "Right, we're going to do it again, but we're going to take 10 minutes to do it." So he did it again. His voice went up and down, and there was effective pauses and all these various other things. And he actually started to use his voice properly. And at the end of it, I said, "Okay, how do you feel telling that story over 10 minutes?" He says, "It feels a lot more natural."
Mm.
Good. I said, "Right, I want you to go home, and tonight I want you to tell that story to your daughter." So he did that, and she absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
She loved that father-daughter time, and she loved the story. And he phoned me up the following day and he says, "Andy," he says, "thank you." He says, "My daughter absolutely loved the story." And he says, "I loved it because it felt a very precious time between her and I telling that story." So it's how we use our voice. We learn that at a very young age, when we're around about two, when we're learning to speak. And you all know we pick up on the key words. So I know my own experience with my youngest was I was driving the car, she was in the car seat in the back, and somebody almost cut the nose off the car, and I swore.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you hear verbatim from the back seat, the swear word. You're thinking, oh,
Hmm.
dear, right, don't tell your mother that when we go home. So children pick up on keywords, uh, and as adults, we can do the same.
Hmm.
But society, to a large extent, pressurizes us to say, right, you need to just targets, 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 get these things done. And we lose that sense of how we use our voice properly. Our voice is a tool,
Mm.
as our ability to listen. So I think it's really important that we practice that. And storytelling is a fantastic way to do that because it allows you to rediscover your voice and the tools that you have, that most of
Mm.
us have,
Yeah.
in terms of that engagement.
Mm. Top tip there. Go and grab a copy of the Gruffalo and
Buffalo,
give
yeah,
it a read. Yeah. Oh wait, when you said read it through in a minute, I was thinking, blimey, because yeah, I would have said it was 10 minutes or maybe even longer
yeah,
to
yeah.
do it when you sort of do all the different yeah. And that is a great skill, isn't it, to have?
Because you're trying to paint a picture into
Mm.
someone's head, and that is, it's very rewarding when you do that with your children,
Yeah.
or children per se, like,
Mm.
So storytelling is, I think, is a great skill,
Yeah.
and it's something that is generationally, certainly in this country, has been really important, and is also culturally very important as well.
Mm.
'Cause that is sometimes in many countries that is how history is handed down.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. If you think about Australia and
Yeah,
the stories handed down over the centuries there, um, and they're still telling them now.
yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's the way to influence people, isn't it? By trying to engage them on an emotive level. Facts and figures and all. That's fine,
yep,
and you need that to reinforce the point. But you're not
yeah.
going to typically you're not going to change somebody's mind by just giving them a list of facts and figures, bringing in a story
No,
and using your
I
voice, as you say, is a way to do
yeah,
it.
I think facts and figures are actually really useful to have. But what I found in working with organisations that I work with, over the years, is I've harvested a lot of stories where we've had near misses, where we've navigated conflicts, and I've collected these stories and used these stories to influence and to teach new staff coming in.
Mm.
I mean, one of the really good examples was, you might remember when there was a blast in Beirut at the port. Our office wasn't far from the port. It's entirely glass fronted.
Right. Right.
And the lady who was the receptionist, administrative officer, had been with us for a long, long time. When the blast happened, the entire glass front of our building smashed in.
Mm.
Uh, and she was sitting at her desk, surrounded by glass, broken glass, completely unscathed. Now, I say to people, and I've given lectures about this, is, and this is, a very faith-based approach to it, is, I see some people, I said, do you believe in miracles? And I said, oh, yeah, yeah. I said, have you witnessed a miracle? And some people, say, well, yes, I have. Okay. There are just some things in life that are unexplainable.
Yeah.
And sometimes use that story along with other stories to say, "Oof, this is, to a conventional logical mind, she should have been injured by that glass.
Yeah.
For some reason, and we don't know what it was, we couldn't explain it, she was unscathed, completely unscathed,
Mm.
despite being surrounded by broken glass. So when you explain these things to you, for me, that's about making it realistic, but also giving people hope
Yeah.
that when you are working through really difficult conflicts and really difficult situations, uh, that it's, I suppose it's how you take these people from what they perceive to be the darkness, which is a really difficult time in their life, and how you guide them into the light
Yeah.
to allow them to move forward. And there is a huge ability for any of us to give individuals hope when they're at probably the lowest point of their life.
Yeah. And that's a lovely place to finish, Andy. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that and learned so much from it. Um, Talk to us just before we finish up. Talk to us a bit about the right path. Who's it for? What sort of people should be reaching out to you, and
Yeah.
how can people contact you? And is there anything else you wanted to plug or talk about?
Yeah, so I got lectured by a good friend that's saying, "Oh, you need to have a website." Okay, okay. Eh, and so I put together the right path, which is a website which uh, tells people who I am and tells people what I do in terms of different skills that I have. I actually really enjoy taking people on that learning journey to become better negotiators. Uh, Particularly in this world, we deal with difficult individuals, and it's very easy to shy away from that.
Yeah,
But with that confidence, with the right skills, you can navigate some of these conversations a lot easier.
yeah,
And I always remember when I was, I think, 16, my father said, "Right, you're going to go for an interview. I want you to sit down in front of the mirror and answer the interview questions." And I thought, "Oh no, I hate doing that."
yeah,
And he got asked, says, "Why are you making me do this?" He says, "Because then you'll see how you react to the questions. You'll see your
mm,
physical reactions." "Oh, okay. So I did it. Was it of benefit? Absolutely. So sometimes when we teach people and push people just a little bit outside their comfort zone, that for me is where they learn
yeah,
really well. And I really enjoy the moments where you see people go, you see the light bulb switch on, thinking, right, I've got this. So I'm happy to help individuals or groups that need that help in negotiation. And sometimes looking at a problem that is difficult from a different lens as a negotiator can help organizations navigate a way forward.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So there's the website, and then connect on LinkedIn is another good way
Connect on
of getting in
LinkedIn, yeah.
touch.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can connect on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the best
yeah,
way to connect with me.
perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much, Andy. Really, really enjoyed it. Hope you did too.
Yeah, I did, Chris. It was really
And
good.
good. Yeah, thank you. And thanks to you at home there for joining, or in your car, or wherever you are, for joining Andy and I. And we'll look forward to seeing you again on another episode of the podcast next week.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.